Hello and welcome to our webinar on new features in totemodata. My name is Diana Eisenberg and I am responsible for marketing at Totemo. I will moderate this webinar today, and with me is my colleague Sebastian, who will give the presentation.
Welcome from my side as well. As already mentioned, my name is Sebastian Urbach. I'm working as professional services consultant, and I'll guide you through this presentation. And of course, I'll introduce you to some new features and functionalities.
Just some quick info on the webinar organization. You are muted during this webinar, so if you have questions, please use the WebEx chat function. It is located on a control panel, and we will then read your questions at the end during the Q&A session. Okay, then let's start.
So the first point is basically the agenda. We have two major functionalities that I'll talk about today. The first one is the group management support for Active Directory groups. And we improved this functionality to be able to link existing Active Directory groups. Then the second point, based on this group management support, is the so-called 4i principle functionality, which allows users to approve package transmission that were created using totemodata. Then I'll go into the configuration, how it actually looks like for the sender, reviewer, and recipient via user experience. So first of all, group management improvements. As I already briefly mentioned, it will be possible to link totemodata groups to existing Active Directory groups, which of course simplifies administrative effort and increases usability for the administrator. And those groups can be used for advanced functionalities such as 4i principle or package approval functionality. So the foundation for this whole configuration is to actually link a existing Active Directory into totemodata. This is what it looks like today, so there weren't any changes, but just as information, which is of course necessary to use the advanced functionality. Then we have the first new feature or improvement. In the group management section, as you can see, I created 4 groups for this demo, and you have the possibility to add a distinguished name for a existing user group, which is configured in the connected Active Directory service. You can see this on the in the screenshot on the right-hand side. And once the connection to this group or the Active Directory in general has been established successfully, all the members will be listed automatically. So, package approval functionalities, or rather 4i principle. This functionality was a requirement from that we got from a lot of customers actually, and this is what it looks like. So you have a sender that has access to files that are hosted on a file store in specific networks or on specific servers. And he can use those files to create a package, but of course it's possible that the files are strictly confidential and the file transmission has to be approved by a third user. In this case, we call him the reviewer. So the solution, as I mentioned, users have access to specific files within certain zones, and he can use those files to create a package using totemodata Web Send It. Those packages that were created this way won't be available outside that zone, so they will only be available within the actual zone that was configured. And based on the policies that you can configure, the user is able to send the package to specific recipients or any recipient, basically. And based on the workflow or the policy, the reviewer has to approve the package transmission. All those policies will be based on IP addresses, more to this part later on during the presentation. And we will use shares in the mount point configuration to enforce certain policies. And depending on these policies, the package is either transmitted to the recipient or it needs to be approved by the reviewer. And of course, it will be possible to have multiple reviewers or a whole group of reviewers. Then we get into the configuration for the administrative console. We added a new menu item under user and server management, which is called package policies. And as you can see in the screenshot, this is where you basically build the foundation to this whole 4i principal functionality. You have the policy name, which is just a unique name to be able to identify the policy in the system. Then you have IP access restriction. As I already mentioned, you're able to use IP addresses, IP ranges, or even whole networks. And as I already said, it's all based on IPs. Then you have fields for recipient and reviewer groups. And these are basically the groups that were configured using totemodata group management functionalities. And those groups were previously created and are basically linked to existing Active Directory groups. One thing worth mentioning is that the field for reviewer group is optional, so it's not mandatory to put a group in here. If you do, it's mandatory to have a person that is actually reviewing and approving the package later on. And last but not least, we have job after access, which basically allows users to automatically run a totemodata job once the package files have been downloaded by all recipients. So we created the package policy, but where do we apply it? So let's get into the virtual file system. As you see on the screenshot and at the top, I created a global mount point. In this case, it's a local FTP server. And later on, I'll use this FTP server and share files to existing users. As you can see, it's of course possible to use a specific remote path to point to certain folders. And later on, which is still in development, it will be possible to use certain variables, such as $user, which allows administrators to automatically mount the user's home folder for the specific user. After we created the mount point, we will use the rights management on the right-hand side to share the file store with existing users. I'll use the Totemo Group FTP access, which I configured and which is linked to an existing Active Directory group. And of course, I'll also add the package policy here, which is called local FTP. At the bottom, you have your standard advanced permission sets, such as read, write, delete, create folder, and so on and so forth. Now this global mount point has been shared with 3 users, and all those users are basically part of this Totemo Group FTP access, which is indicated by the red arrows. All those users have now access to the files on this server. Now that all the configuration is done, let's get into the user experience. So how does it actually look like for the end user? This part will be split into 3 parts. We have the sender, then we have the reviewer, and in the end we have the actual recipient of the files. As I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, the users will use the package creation, or rather totemodata web send it, to prepare packages. And Something that's worth mentioning is that using this patch or this update, it will be possible to authenticate yourself using Kerberos. But of course, for the end user, there's not much to see. And as you can see, which is marked in red, you have the possibility to use My Windows credentials to authenticate yourself using Kerberos. Once the user has authenticated himself, they use this existing functionality, totemodata web send it. It's basically still the same look and feel. We just added some new functionalities, of course. So at the top, you have still your fields for recipients, for the subject, for the message that you want to deliver, and of course, you have fields for your actual attachments. As we configured the policy and set a group for the reviewers, it will now be mandatory for the sender to specify certain reviewers, as you can see at the top. And then, because we shared this file server with this user, they will be able to browse this local FTP server and use the files that are stored in this file server to create a package. Something worth mentioning is that we have implemented so-called recipient lookup. So once you start typing the names for the recipients or the reviewers, you will have some kind of auto-completion. You are able to see 3 names here, or 3 users, and those 3 users are also part of this Active Directory group, which was configured previously. Now that the sender created the package and sent the package on its way, it has to be reviewed by the reviewer. He'll just get a simple notification that user A is trying to send packages or files to user B, but this package transmission has to be approved. So he'll need to log into SFX, the user interface, and on the left-hand side, you can see right away there are some outstanding package approvals. And as we already know, this user has access to all the information, to the recipient of the package, to the message, and of course, to the files attached. So the workflow would be to download the files, check if the file is okay to be sent out, and once it's okay and the user is approving the package, he can use the buttons we implemented here. One of them is approve package, the other one is decline package. Once the package has been approved by the reviewer, it will be delivered to the actual recipient that was set, and he'll just get a simple email notification that he has a new package, and then of course he can use totemodata web receive it or existing protocols that he's using, and of course he can also log into SFX to download the files. And now that the recipient downloaded all the files, this would be the time to run a totemodata job that was configured to, for example, move the package to a different file store or a different location, to delete the package, so on and so forth. So to sum it up, or rather a summary for all the new features and improvements, as I mentioned, we improved the group management support for Active Directory groups. It will be possible to link totemodata groups to existing Active Directory groups, which of course simplifies administrative effort and increases usability for the end user or administrator in this case. Then I gave a brief introduction to the 4i principle, which allows users to approve transfer of packages and file transmissions in general. And of course, related to that, we have permission-based share policies. Something I mentioned briefly was Kerberos support, which will be available with this update as well. So end users will be able to log into the SFX or totemodata web send it using their Windows credentials. And last but not least, we enhance performance.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian. So let's look at some questions that came in. There's a question about if different reviewers can be defined for each folder.
That depends what you mean by folder. You can, of course, create different mount points that are pointing to the same file store and pointing to different folders on this file store. And for every mount point that you create, you can set a different policy. So in this case, it would be possible.
Okay. So there's another question, or this question more refined. Is it possible to define different policies then for each mount point?
Yes, that's definitely possible, because once you create this mount point and share it with users, you will be able to specify your policy, so you can share the mount point multiple times with different users and just set a different policy.
Okay. Then this is something you mentioned right at the end about some performance improvements in totemodata. Can you elaborate a bit on that, because you didn't speak about it before?
We basically improved the performance for file transmission using existing protocols, but something that is very interesting for the end users, of course, is performance improvements for WebDAV. So basically, as soon as you're using your built-in default WebDAV client from your Windows box and connect to a file store, this WebDAV client will create a lot of
listings or requests
for the server, but these requests won't be cached. So for every listing you're doing, for every time you're trying to get the list of files, you'll get a new request to the server. So this is something we did on the totemodata server side, that we cache all those requests to improve the performance in general.
Okay, thanks. And then you also mentioned it. So it's an update to Totemo. And when will it be available for everyone?
It will be available by the end of April this year for all the customers, and of course it will be free of charge.
Okay. Let me see if there's any other question. No, it doesn't look like. So many thanks for your participation today, and yes, thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you from my side as well for joining, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.